Red Mage. The flashy, sword swinging, spell slinging swashbuckler is kinda boring. And that really hurts. Red Mage in concept is my favorite job. It is, not going to lie, the reason I started playing 14. And while it was fun and interesting when I was learning the game, it just feels like it's missing something now that I've become a veteran. So today I'm going to make those changes. Add what I think is missing. But understand, these are my own personal changes for my own vision of Red Mage. While I would love to see some of these changes in the game, I'm not going to advocate or call to arms. Agrees with me, just giving one possibility amongst many. Before we get into those changes, though, I feel I should talk about the problems I have with the current Red Mage. First problem being the AoE rotation. It's really underwhelming. Its lack of climax really hurts it, and while it's better than Stormblood, it's not by much. Second, their gauge doesn't really add to their job. I really want more interaction with it and make the balancing and building the gauge more fun. And finally, the sword swinging part of my description is sort of false. Red mages are hardly ever swinging the sword, and that's kinda dumb. The dual cast feature just begs for sword skills being weaved between spells, and I mean, there's spectral swords. It doesn't really count. Look at the battle stance. Their sword is held out and ready to strike. Instead, they make it a staff over and over again. Like, sheesh, just keep it as a staff if you're going to be casting 90% of the time. So those are the problems. Let's talk about rules. Rules for the redesign. Rules are important and you need to know them. First rule, only 32 skills. That's 2 crossbars on controller without the advanced features, and any more than that, and I feel the class becomes too complicated and bloated to play. This includes roll actions for the most part, but does not include general actions like sprint, teleport, potions, food, emotes, whatever. Second rule, keep as much the same as possible. Unlike my Dark Knight design, I feel Red Mage is put together well enough, but just need some things built on top of it to make it a complete feeling job. Okay, final rule, don't add anything Square wouldn't consider. I'm not about adding some random jank that has no chance of getting in. I want the design to be plausible. With that, everything is set, let's move on. The first thing I'm going to be doing is removing some skills. I have a couple skills I want to add, and to keep under my 32 count, I'm going to have to get rid of something. The first 2 skills are Flesh and Contrary 6 Day. I'm sure that's how you pronounce those. While cool, I don't know which Red Mage from which Final Fantasy is able to summon spectral swords, and they don't interact with the rest of the Red Mage design. I think I can do better. The next skill to remove is Scatter and Impact. I'm adjusting the AoE rotation and adding skills to it, which this one could fit, but better left out. I still have 2 more skills to remove. Some may be happy to see it go, being Engagement. I'm taking away the damage from displacement and adding a few other sword skills in its place, so this isn't really a major change at all. And for my final skill to remove, perhaps more controversial being Reprise. I needed one more slot, and it was between this and Jolt. And I think the case could be made for either, but I wanted to keep some of the proc style gameplay intact. That brings our total skills from 29 to 24, which is just enough to fit in everything I want to add. But along with those additions, I'll be revising some of these spells already in the repertoire. Most of the changes are aesthetic, but there are some larger changes I want to talk about. First changes are the slow cast spells for arrow and for thunder are now called for fire and for glare. This is accompanied by the fast proccing spells for stone and for blizzard. In a similar vein, for arrow 2 and for thunder 2 are changed to for freeze and for quake, while impact, which was removed earlier, is being replaced with 2 new skills for fire 2 and for glare 2. Makes the casting rotation and AoE or single target about the same, minus jolt, of course. And while these changes are aesthetic, they're little things that make you go neat. It serves a purpose. Black mages spend as little time in Umbral Eyes as possible and go into the much stronger Astral Fire, while white mages' main damage spells upgrade from tossing stones to glaring at enemies. Players who have played Black or White Mage before unlocking Red, which is somewhat likely being you need to be at least 50 to play it, is more likely to make that connection with spell names and could gain an understanding of the job faster outside of reading action descriptions. Before we get on to the last major changes, this is more of a, it doesn't have to, but I would like it, which is for Vicure to give black and white mana in combat, so Red Mage has something to do in downtime. Now I wanted to talk about the finishing spells for Flare and for Holy. These are used at the end of your melee combo before going into Scorch. And the change I'd like to make is that they are now AoE and you use one after the other before going into Scorch, such as for Flare, for Holy, Scorch, or for Holy, for Flare, Scorch. This increases the amount of time you have to move around freely, and for a job about balance, it makes sense to use both black and white finishers before the final Red Mage spell. You can even upgrade the second of the skills into a new spell if you wish. I do want to see what Verdeth looks like, but it should probably be in a new expansion. One final quality of life change is that all your black and white magic spells change to these after completing a melee combo, so that you do not accidentally misclick. I mean, there's no reason not to use these skills. You might as well ensure the player does it. That wraps up the spells pretty nicely. Let's move on to the sword skills. There are a lot of new additions and changes, so I'll try and be quick. Displacement now doesn't deal damage, is faster, and doesn't go as far. It also doesn't require an enemy to use, making it pretty much elusive jump, but, flashier because it's Red Mage. Core now has 2 charges. This helps with manification not overlapping in places, and being a melee fire, getting that extra charge is considered standard. Flurry is a new conal AoE skill which combos off Moulinette and will lead into a new AoE for Flare, for Holy, and Scorch. So that wraps up the AoE combo pretty nicely. It gives it a sort of climax, and it really feels like a complete AoE rotation now. Let's move on to the new gauge. I'm calling it the Blade Gauge. Nice and simple. I see these sword skills as fortifying and strengthening residue mana in the sword after casting a spell. And by using these moves, the Red Mage is putting that residue mana to use, adding it back into the mana gauge. It can store 3 charges, and these charges can be expended to use OGCD skills. You gain Blade Gauge by expending the dual cast buff with a 50% chance of it proccing, with it being guaranteed during acceleration, and also gaining 1 off for Flare, for Holy, and Scorch. The more powerful spells have a lot more mana left over after all. While explaining the gauge out of the way, let's talk about the skills. The first skill, a single target 1 gauge use move, which I call Condense. The second skill, a line AoE, which I call Temper. And a final 3 gauge cost skill, which is a high damaging move and a conal AoE, probably on a long cooldown, called Blade Work. Using any of these moves adds extra mana to your mana gauge and are all melee, ensuring that you get to swing your sword about in combat. But with the increased mana intake, I don't want the blade combo to be the only thing to use mana on, which is why the final 2 skills are dedicated to that. The skills Windblade and Thunderblade are single target off globals, which cost 20 white or black mana each, and these are sort of like, they could be really anything. They could be high damaging moves, dots, a self buff. They could have cooldowns if you wished, or they couldn't. They could be on the GCD as well to break the monotony of spellcasting. Truly, you can do anything with these two. As long as they cost the gauge, it adds in that interaction. And that's really what I'm looking for. There is a little bit of housekeeping, but that's it with the skills. First, auto attack scale off intelligence. This is to encourage sword swinging and to be in melee range, which Red Mage should now do with the changes. Second, manification is extended to fit in the extra spell. And third and finally, adjust the leveling so that similar spells are gained at the same time. I really think it's rude how Square has you leveling, unlocking similar acting spells at different times. Red Mage is about balance, right? Okay, I'm done. I don't want the Terry. I think it's a pretty good rough design. And if you think you want a real numbers and potencies look, I can totally do that. Just leave your thoughts and comments down below. And I'll see you in the next video. Oliver out. Bye.